lives in town.
Jean,
Yeah.
Jean, you might have to stop the recording and start it again because it's two separate meetings. Did you do that?
You need me, Ben?
I did that.
High school lacrosse.
Okay, we're,
College lacrosse.
I'm unmuted, the room is unmuted, sorry. I'm trying to make sure the camera gets adjusted. There, it's working. And then.
Let me know when you're ready and I'll start recording.
Okay, so, up there is on the room, right? Okay, that's the problem. That is just different and I don't understand why. Okay, are we ready, guys? I think we're ready to start, Jean.
You're good to go.
All right, great. Okay, well, I would like to welcome everybody to a special meeting of the Board of Selectmen for Wednesday, February 1st at 6:45. Please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Loves Bruce.
All right.
Just goes right to Bruce.
I haven't quite figured out what it is doing here. So, okay, with that, I guess I'll ask Jean if there are any citizens' comments, and I will say that if there are any attendees, there'll be an opportunity for citizens' comments at the end of the meeting as well. Any hands raised?
Currently, there are no hands raised.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, with that, then let's move to item number 3. Discuss and take action to approve the hiring of Maria Patolo to the position of land use technician, land use department, 35.5 hours a week, salary grade 6, step 5, $58.54 annually. The position is funded in the current fiscal year budget.
So moved. Second.
Okay, any discussion? This is related to what we had on our last agenda,
Yep,
so,
yep,
all right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion passes unanimously.
Peggy,
Next
I
is-
just I couldn't hear who motioned and seconded.
I motion Scott.
I seconded.
Bruce.
Thank you.
Okay, yep. Item number 4, discuss and take action to approve the restructuring of the land use department to include a land use official into the town's classified plan. Salary grade 10, 35.5 hours per week. The position is funded in the current fiscal year budget. Recruitment for the position will commence upon approval by the Board of Selectmen.
So moved. Second.
Okay, great. You received a
Bruce,
memo.
then Scott.
Yep, Bruce and Scott, and this is just to highlight, the board discussed this in December. The board also got a memo describing the restructuring, and so backup information on this. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 5, discuss and take action to approve the restructuring of the land use department to revise the town planner position in the town's classified plan, salary grade 17. The position is funded in the current fiscal year budget. So moved.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Part of that memo? Okay,
Jen,
all in
then Scott.
favor? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, next item on the agenda, discuss process to update floodplain ordinance. So with that, I will share my screen. I sent out some materials yesterday to the board. I think it's pretty much what you saw. I might have made a few amendments. That.
Security alert.
Okay, so, Jean, can you just confirm you can see this okay and hear us?
Yes, I can see all your slides and I can hear you.
Okay, great, okay. So I just thought it was helpful to have some visuals. We just went through a storm in December, on December 23rd, that was not even that strong of a storm. And yet we experienced extensive flooding. And all of these neighborhoods have had flooding in the past, but I just thought it would be helpful to provide a visual, because why do we care about the floodplain ordinance? Well, this is why. These events are becoming more frequent. The flooding is coming in further, and it's impacting more properties than it used to. And so it shows extensive flooding on Middle Beach Road. There's a photo of the Surf Club, and Linden Lane, and also Texas Road. And we know Texas Road, we've had a lot of recurring flooding issues, even with minor rainfall happening in that area. I also put this on here. These are pictures. The other ones were what our public works director took. These are ones that I had taken. And I thought was interesting on Middle Beach Road, because you have on these two pictures, you have one house that's a newly built home that's compliant, that's actually 2 foot above BFE or whatever. That is a new home. And then next to it, and you can see it in the next picture, this garage. And you see the new home is above the water. And then you see the older structure that has been there for, probably decades, if not more, that is impacted with the flooding waters. And then Route 1, we had a lot of flooding. That's a known problem. But this was even more extensive than we had seen, I think, through other storms. And then Circle Beach just shows how extensive this one storm was to Circle Beach. That's always been a problem neighborhood. So these are the reasons, because it requires the town to react to emergency services, to help citizens that are going through this. And then it requires rebuilding efforts and infrastructure investments to fix the roads, to clean things up. So all taxpayers are now having to address some of the problems that the water and storms and things like that are causing to town infrastructure. So I thought it was just important to reflect on this, because I know that, that the board had taken up this issue. Actually, the Coastal Resiliency Commission came forward with a proposal of an update to the ordinance to be more forward-thinking, to account for the fact that there is going to be sea level rise in the future, and the state is telling us we have to plan for that 20-inch sea level rise. And the Coastal Resiliency Commission came up with a proposal, and I know there was a lot of public concern about that proposal, a little bit of a backlash, and we had some meetings where we had a lot of people in attendance concerned about what that new ordinance would mean for them as a property owner. And so I think we decided at that point to just kind of take a step back and do some more research and try to take a fresh look at it. And I think now is the time to take the fresh look. We kind of put it on the back burner, but the reality is it is something that we have to update. And I'll talk a little bit about why it's important to do that. And we appreciate all the hard work the Resiliency Commission did on this. But recognizing some of these are big public policy decisions that are going to have a direct impact on property owners. And so I think the board felt, we're just going to have to focus on those issues and make some decisions and move forward. And so I worked with town staff, and they've started drafting a new ordinance or making changes to our ordinance. A lot of it reflects some of the recommendations from the Coastal Resiliency Commission, which are really based on what the state's recommending. But in order to have a full draft, though, there's some policy issues that the board has to give them direction on. So to highlight where residents were concerned about, one of them is the look back period. And the look back period is basically, any changes you make to your property, if you're in the flood zone, you're limited on how much you can spend relative to your property value. Because if you're going to spend over 50% of the value, you need to make sure your building is elevated, so it's compliant and forgetting the term now. Help me out here. Anyway, so you have to raise your house effectively if it's not above, right? If it's not out of the flood zone. So that means if you want to renovate your kitchen, but you want to put in a really high-end kitchen, that could cause a problem. You might have, a roof that collapsed in because a tree fell on it. That's expensive. That might be over 50% of the value of your structure. So those types of things impact that, but now it triggers possibly having to raise your house. So that was concerning to people. Right now, we only have a 1-year look back period. But the other towns, a lot of towns, and we'll see this later, actually have 3 years, 5 years, or some of the life of the structure. So that means every time you spend money on your property in an improvement to your structure, it's like they start keeping track of it. So 1 year you do 20,000, the next year you do 30,000. That accumulates up, and it factors into that 50% number. So that's why the look back period is so important. The other thing is the base flood elevation and what the requirements are for rebuilding. Is it at base flood elevation? Is it plus 1 foot? Is it plus 2 feet? So that was means how high are you going to have to raise your house if you're going to have to raise it? And then how you calculate that structure value. The town uses what the assessor's appraised value of the property. So whatever the town assessor thinks the value of your structure is, that's the number we use. Some towns actually allow for outside appraisals. They look at other things. So, and as we know, sometimes the assessors doesn't reflect the market value, right? But so this is discussion, I think, of whether or not. But right now, and there's a lot of reasons that the staff thinks it's important to stay with that metric. And we can talk about that later. And then how you value the improvements. What is the cost of those improvements? And it gets into technical things, but our building inspector is an expert in this area and comes up with an estimate. And sometimes the property owner doesn't agree with that. And it makes a big difference if you're bumping up to that 50% number, what the building inspector says the cost of the project is versus what you think the cost of the project is. So that's created some controversy. Now, I know the ordinance that had been presented had some penalties, more aggressive, we would say, penalties for people. And I think that had a little bit of a backlash. And so we're talking about trying to just align this at least with going with what we have in the building code, because there's a whole enforcement mechanism within the building code. And then variances. So can you get a variance from the ordinance? And, there are restrictions about what the town can do in variances. And I think some members of the public doesn't understand that. Like, it's not like that we have a lot of leeway. There's requirements from FEMA of how we look at variances and when we can allow for variances. So those were the concerns. And then I know a lot of people had raised questions about the floodplain ordinance and FEMA. Like, do we even need look back periods? Do we need this? Do we need that? And our current ordinance does comply with it, and we are included in the National Flood Insurance Program. And so a lot of the things that were in the ordinance about the definition of improvement repairs and things like that, we are compliant with FEMA, and that's why we use those definitions. So it's not that we're being more stringent, but we are following what is required by FEMA. And we can't change that. FEMA does not allow us to change that. We talked about the issue with appraised value. So the town, FEMA does allow the town to make that determination of what appraised value is, and we use the assessor's appraised value for a property. The look back period is permitted. FEMA does not require a look back period. And I think that was a big discussion, about a year or two ago when we talked about this. But as you'll see later, pretty much everybody has a look back period in coastal communities, because the state is acknowledging it's important to have that look back period. The point of the look back period is to incentivize people to elevate their homes, to make them more resilient. The other thing is, as a property owner, you get a benefit on your insurance because the town that you have a compliant property. But there's also additional benefits if the town decides to participate in this, what's called a community rating system. So that's above what the basic requirements are for National Flood Insurance Program. And that was something I think that got lost in previous conversations too, by being more, having a stricter policy above the baseline means there's some benefits for homeowners with their insurance rates. So this was compiled by our town planner, and it shows, and this basically follows the coastline all the way from Greenwich up to Stonington, that, and particularly if you look at the look back period, I mean, everybody has a look back period, and some towns are really strict. Life of the structure means if you want to do anything to your building, that's it, and then some have 10 years. And then some have 1 like us, but our neighbors have 5. Guilford has 5, Clinton has 5. So we are on, I would say, the lighter side, in terms of our length of our look back period. And then you can see, like, in terms of using appraisals, some towns use the assessor value, some allow the public to submit appraisals, so it's kind of all over the place on that, I would say, different options. And then the base flood elevation, almost all the towns have at least 1 foot. And I think from what I understand, and Vin can correct me if I'm wrong later, but the building code requires +1, doesn't it, for certain zones?
Yep.
So we're basically requiring an additional foot above base flood elevation already. So we're kind of in line with everybody else, right? And we can get into, there's a lot more into that, because then if you're in a VE zone, which is different, it might be +2. So those are detailed conversations that, as you get into the developing the terms of the ordinance, we can talk about. But it just gives you a sense of where the rest of the Connecticut shoreline is. So if you take those issues that residents raised that kind of stood out as the biggest, there were other things that people didn't like about the draft ordinance and stuff, but these were kind of like the themes. This sets up what we can consider. And then I think getting feedback from staff. And really, I think the board has to decide how it wants to tackle each of these, and then give some direction to the staff, so that they can finalize a draft and bring it back. And so I don't know when you want to do that, but this is, do you want to extend the look back period? The state's recommending 5 years, our neighbors are at 5 years, other communities are 2 to 3 years. And then I think one of the things on the look back period, the other thing that was a little bit caused some controversy was the retroactive nature of it. Like before, the original draft had said it starts here and it's going to cover anything in the last 3 or 5 years. So that means people who had made investments in their home and they might have had a list of stuff, all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, now I can't do this or I can't do that because I'm going to trigger that 50%. So it hurts people who are kind of in the middle of projects. Then you have some people that are literally in the middle of projects that would have to elevate their house, like in construction. So I think that there was some solutions that the staff had about how to do that, and not to have a retroactive, so ease people into it. So there's a way to do that a little bit more, to make it easier for moving into that. So I guess I'll get back. I'll just go through the next couple slides and then we can talk about how we want to move forward. But this is really the page I think the board has to start saying, okay, let's. And I think we put a proposal out and then hear what the public says. I think that we have to also, I think, confirm what our objectives are, right? And this is kind of what I gleaned from conversations. We have to align with the building code. Our floodplain doesn't necessarily align with it right now, and other state regulations. We need to encourage people. And the question is, how much are we going to require them to update their properties and make them more compliant? And so the degree of that will be how we design some of these policy issues. We need to protect these neighborhoods because of sea level rise, and that's all those photos we talked earlier. And then I think also make modifications so that people can get further benefits with their insurance. And that's a discussion point. Erin's not here tonight, but I think in the future she could talk a little bit more about that CRS program and how that might help residents. So I think figuring out those objectives and going through those policy issues and giving some, decisions to staff so they can finalize the draft, because they've got, I would say 90% of it. And then there's like these little brackets, how many years are we going to put in here and how are we going to, so then we can actually have something that can be rolled out to the public for feedback again. And I know we've had a lot of public feedback, and I think everything's been reviewed and talked about. The staff has read a lot of it. And we had a lot of public comment, so we're not ignoring that. We have actually, at least the staff has taken time, and I know the board, and you'll get an opportunity to see a lot of it. But we have heard the concerns of the public, and that's very much top of mind as we move forward with the ordinance. So that's kind of it. So I think it's really board discussion. I could leave this page up as a discussion page, but I guess.
Have at it.
Yeah.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
Well, I think the administrative changes that we have to make to be just up to speed with state building code, right? That's easy. I understand that probably the state building code trumps whatever is in our ordinance now, but just to avoid confusion,
You need to be aligned.
just
Yeah.
have them
Right.
aligned,
Yeah.
right? That just makes sense. Clearly, we don't want to do something that puts our status with the flood insurance program in jeopardy. But beyond that, my inclination is to do as little as possible. And I know it's easy to think about Middle Beach Road and those pictures when we talk about this, but this is any floodplain in the town of Madison. There's a floodplain in Heatherwood, I believe.
For rivers and.
So it's, so any drainage, any land in Madison that's in a floodplain, and if you live in one, I'm sure you know about it, these rules would apply to you. And it can have some unintended consequences if we simply focus on a 20-inch rise in sea level and then build our policy off of that. So I know I tend to stay very focused on that 60-year-old split entry ranch that's in a floodplain that is nothing to do with the ocean. And how are we impacting or possibly impacting that, what I would say, more modest home? Okay, not some big, beautiful place on the water that we'd all like to live in if we could. So there's a lot of things we can't do because the government says, the calculation, the 50% calculation is not up for debate. We can't toss out normal maintenance. We just can't impact that calculation, right? So I think our biggest lever that we can pull is the look back on it. I did go through the FEMA, they have a handbook on this. It's great reading if you want to go to sleep.
Do that next to Robert's rules.
But they do have an interesting note in there about how we treat look back. We can distinguish between an improvement like my 25-year-old shingles are 27 years old, they need to be replaced. And my house got washed away in a flood and I have to rebuild it. So we can, I believe, we'll need to verify this, but we can distinguish, we could say have a look back for flood-related damage repairs. And then a different criteria for, I want to update my 50-year-old kitchen.
You can, that is a possibility. I think that was discussed last year or something like that. And we need to get more direction from town council. I know that in conversations we've had with staff, there's an administrative challenge with that. And I don't know if any other towns do that. So I'm just saying, because now you're getting into a lot more judgment about why an improvement is being done.
Yeah, a new kitchen is likely
Yeah.
not for
Right.
flood related.
Right.
Right, so but I'm saying, I don't think it's as, I think it is, and I don't know if you want to weigh in at all, but I know when we talked about it a little bit, that seemed to create some challenges, of how do you actually fairly administer that?
Well,
Well, I mean, if
just
it's related to a storm event, it
you're
would be
gonna
pretty
have an
straightforward,
insurance
right?
claim, I would think, to help substantiate, if there was damage that was done as a result of a storm, you would have that extra documentation to help substantiate as opposed to, I just want to do a bathroom or a kitchen.
Right, or I want to replace my windows because they're leaking.
Right.
And one of the consequences of this other thing that we can't change, we're not allowed to look at the property in total as an appraised value. We can only look at the structure. And the way our town, and probably most towns, break it out, the land is worth a lot of money and the structure is not so much.
And things like septic repairs or replacements of aging systems would count against,
I think they
This
do.
total?
Septic does not.
They do
they
not?
do not.
Septic does not.
Septic does not,
Okay.
okay, and pools do not, but attached porches, so if you had a deck,
If it's
Right,
anything related to the structure,
right.
Anything
that,
that's connected to the structure.
the main
Okay.
structure.
And I think that.
What about
What about a
additional,
shed?
like a, yeah, shed or a pool house?
so
or
no, garages
a
don't.
Separate structure.
separate,
Yeah,
okay.
garages don't, sheds don't. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we,
So
I
you want to explore then the
I want to
idea of
explore
separating
separating
two
out.
different look back periods.
exactly.
Okay.
I mean, the house that is continually battered in from flooding should be raised. I mean, it's just common sense. But somebody who needs to replace their 30-year-old roof shouldn't be faced with the additional cost of raising their house because they're simply maintaining the structure the way it should be. And worse, I need to replace my windows because they're leaking or they're bad, but I know that that's gonna use up, 30%. That's gonna take 30% of the calculation. And I'm in 2 years thinking I'm gonna have to do my roof because it's 30 years old. And now, do I not do my windows because I'm afraid my roof is I can't do both?
And then do we run into problems of, say, gentrification? Because there are people that have maybe had these homes in their family for a number of generations, and it's not like, they're moving into $1 million homes, or they're in areas of, river floodplains and that sort of thing, and now we're pricing them out of
Yeah, they can't keep.
their
it up.
houses because they can't afford to raise it.
Yeah, I think to me that, I want to kind of go back to where Bruce started this, which is, I'm not looking to hurt homeowners here, right? I think, less government restriction, less, movement. I'm personally, if I was to look at your categories here, look back period, I'm thinking 1 year, we leave it. Like, I'm not looking to increase it to 5 years. I think that considerably hurts the homeowners. Base flood elevation, I think we need to get some guidance from the state. What is the state suggesting that we should be doing here? Right now, we're at BFE, and maybe that we need to start moving in a different direction, but maybe the state, becomes the regulator as opposed to the municipality. So I think that's something we
We're
need
at
to.
BFE +1 already. because of-
We're at BFE +1 because the state building code
But they're
requires.
moving to BFE
Right.
+2 likely, right?
No,
We don't know
no,
yet.
not
No,
anytime
there's certain-
soon. I mean, they're gonna start doing a FEMA study sometime this year. The new FEMA maps are not gonna come out till 2028 to 2030,
So we have time.
plenty of time.
But
So,
there-
but the
there is
building, the model
the high
state
velocity
code,
zones.
model flood ordinance is what is based on what we've been using and tidying up.
Right.
Per se. It's almost 100% verbatim. There's some stuff that we have that's from our present ordinance to the new ordinance. We're only talking like 4 or 5 different lines to make a decision on. We're pretty much going forward.
Right, but I think that's where you started, which is let's align, whatever the state regs are to our ordinances, and gets consistency. I think we have to be consistent. To help you, frankly, too, and help our homeowners.
Yeah, I mean, it's still based on cost, I mean, unfortunately, you gotta take out the emotional part out of it. Of course. And it's a number. And there's a guideline, I forget what number it was, like PA 145 or something like that, from
Can you guys
FEMA.
come in more, because you're not getting captured here, so come on. No, but people need to hear you if they watch
And,
this recording,
well,
so.
and this particular one, this guideline from FEMA tells you all the items that need to be included in the cost.
At least go in the front row, please, because the camera's not gonna. Go on, they're just right there. 'Cause that'll help.
They can't hear you.
Yeah.
I think people are saying they can't hear you.
I'd like to sound off next year. We've discussed this mightily, and I appreciate Bruce getting us started here. And I think the left side of this table is going to be of a like mind. I'm much of the mind of using the encourage approach rather than the required approach. And as I look at the various considerations which Peggy has laid out for us here, I don't see the communal harm in not taking the encourage approach. I don't see why, maybe I just haven't heard yet, why there's communal harm in not doing the least we can do and encourage, but not require. If there's a communal harm in doing that, I think we all better discuss that. I don't think I've heard it yet. So very simply, for the items laid out on this, I'm going to be looking to do the minimal for each of those items and keeping encourage in mind as opposed to require. So when we get down to the next level of detail, it sounds like Bruce and I will be sort of saying the same thing here. But I think we should get to the foundational stuff before we get lost in the weeds here. So I'm very interested in hearing from everybody.
No, I agree with that very much so, that, you know, if we're meeting the requirements that FEMA and the state has set forth, that's number one priority. And then number two priority, I agree, is, you know, encourage but not required. You know, let people know that this is, you know, what the new recommendations are, so to speak, but this is what the requirement is. So,
Listen, we've all heard too, 2025 or 2050, there's going to be a significant amount of sea level rise. So, you know, I think, you know, maybe our approach here to some extent is a little bit of an education program to ensure that homeowners recognize the impact of sea level rise. Even just showing those pictures is a little bit of an aha moment, I think, for people. So I think we probably can do more of that in helping our residents. But at the end of the day, I think we have to be mindful of restrictions too, and over governing to some
Right.
extent.
right, yeah, I mean, it is their property and they have elected to live in those locations and they see how the storms affect their own properties. And I'm sure, you know, we're aware as well what the potential risks were, you know, when moving into property adjacent to water.
I think the one thing that might be worth discussing is the difference between improvements versus new construction.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we
and-
have talked about that.
And I think that, I mean, we've talked about the look backs, right? Alternate look backs, but then, and this is where I would defer to Vinnie, in terms of, I think, you know, if somebody's starting to, there's no cost difference really. You can do a 1 foot or 2 foot, right? It's gonna be the same price. So if we want to encourage, do we require for new construction a different set of standards than obviously we would have for improvements? And I'm just, you know, right now, the requirement for new construction and improvements,
It's BFE +1, as the building code states.
right?
I would say the larger portion of people who are building, like the picture you
A
had.
lot of them are doing too,
They're doing 2
Right.
foot.
but we're not
but-
requiring.
And is that as a recommendation of you, Vinny, or just?
Well, they get the
No,
insurance.
I mean,
right?
it's, well, I mean, I've mentioned it, you know, but it's really, it's an insurance thing. So I mean,
You're getting an
you could
advantage.
go BFE +1 and you're with FEMA and meeting the state regs, and then you could go BFE +1 foot 8 and only put in, you know, another 7-8 inches of concrete instead of going to 2, and FEMA rounds up, so they count you as +2, and your insurance is much less. So, I mean, there's a game to be played there as well, so.
Okay.
But new building is just state building code.
Straight up.
So it's
But
BFE 1.
most people want to save the money, and they actually go up the +2 by themselves. you're not making them go up +2, I think do I suggest it? Absolutely. But it's not my pocketbook to spend how much more concrete it costs to go up.
So, yeah, so the tear down is subject to the new, and the rebuild is subject to the state building code. And then what other value decisions they want to make along the way. But they're not raising a structure. They're
But it
not-
sounds like we don't
No.
really govern.
And we don't
need.
need, I don't think we
Well,
would really.
But I think that the other discussion, I'm just reflecting on, the conversations that the coastal resiliency had, is there's this higher velocity, the VE zone, right, the coastal zone, so those are like the ones right on the water.
Yeah, it has more weight.
Right, so should those have the same requirements as somebody on Heatherwood? No, I mean, they're right on the water, so then it's like, is that where we then are more restrictive, looking at that zone and saying, okay, maybe that should be 2 feet? I think that was kind of the thinking, there were, you go BFE 2 for this specific area because of the nature of the, and is that,
I don't know, I think the BFE +1 is, and you can always suggest to go higher. I think one is higher than we're at now, so.
so the board though, so most of your comments are obviously, you think just stick with the building code.
Yeah,
I
I think so, yeah.
I think that's the most straightforward.
And then we design the ordinance to follow the building code. So if the state then makes, changes to that, we stay in compliance with the state regs.
And we could even put in language that allows the ordinance to automatically update when
Right.
the governing state reg.
So they stay
Yeah,
on.
so they stay.
Yeah, I think that's smart.
Yeah.
I think we've done that a couple
We had
of times
time.
with new ordinances.
It's the charter, I think it's in the charter.
I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, and it's discouraging that we have so few levers to pull. And I think that's what, it's important that everybody who's paying attention to this understand that we don't have a blank piece of paper to work from here. And, I mean, unless we want to propose to opt out of the National Flood Insurance, which we can do. We can choose as a community to opt out. And just be subject to the state building code. But I don't think that's a serious consideration.
I'm sure there are a lot of other things that would impact. That kind
And
of
I'm not
decisions.
proposing it as a good solution.
I know.
It's a solution.
So on structure value, if we were to move along the list, since we're kind of moving along,
I
This
think
is-
again, the source document mentions a couple of different avenues and then leaves it up to us to choose one or more of those. I think the concern we have with the appraised value is people say the appraised value is always lagging. And it's either always lagging against you or in favor of you, but it's never current, right? Right,
it will
so.
be soon.
But then it will immediately be
Yeah.
updated.
Yeah, it feels.
Yeah.
But it's also the most consistent, so
And I think
everybody-
that's the utility of the appraisal, is that it is the most consistent application of how do we value.
But then we get into the conversation about
Of course, we could,
private appraisal versus,
Well, we're talking about.
can can we shift value from the land onto the structures? Is that within the town's purview? So let's just, I'm gonna use an extreme example, a $1.2 million lot with a $150,000 structure on it. Okay, so that house has got $75,000 worth of improvements that it can see. Could we shift that 1.2 and maybe make it a $300,000 structure or something? I don't.
I don't think Orietta does that. Because the
Well, I don't know.
land goes up and the house goes up. So I mean, that's their gig. I'm not really up on it, but
I'm guessing because now, you're basically redefining. I don't know if you can change that. It's a definition of what is part of the calculation.
So it's a way to manipulate the math.
Yeah, and I just don't know if that is even an option to do.
And it may not be,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it kind
I
of
gotta
gets
think
again,
it's in
gets-
place for a reason.
But, well, and it gets in the way of the spirit of the regulation, like to encourage people to, the more bandwidth you give to, then the less likely people will be doing that.
we had,
Raising their structure, so, but it's something, that's a question we can follow up and I think get an answer on.
I spoke with Diane, or emailed Diane Akovic, who's in charge of the floodplain for the state, about that. And it was really only the market value. You know, the way that we've been doing it, it's been consistent for a very long time. And if you get into the part where an applicant wants to use an outside appraiser, private appraiser.
Right.
Of course, the numbers are gonna be inflated, but I mean, that happens with everybody, but her response was, well, you can bring that to the assessor and then, well, that's your new value, so that's what I tax you on. So I discussed this.
Both ways.
I mean, I discussed this with Arietta, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
No, because she can't.
Everybody
should be doing that.
No, she has to
Until
go
the new
by her
grand list.
process and, yeah.
It needs to be consistent.
But it does go in, well, yeah. So I think though, that is I think, decision the board would have to make about whether or not it would want to deviate from what the town has been doing for a long time. It's also administratively much better, much simpler to stick with, we have, it's on record, otherwise, you have to have some parameters. You can't just like, what's a qualified, certified appraiser, what? So it does create some, I think, challenges there, but so, but it's an option and a lot of towns do offer it. For residents to use outside appraiser.
So one of the interesting quandaries that's happened as part of all of this COVID and the escalation of materials is you have an appraisal that was done in what, 18-ish, right? When plywood was $15 a sheet. And so, and that appraisal is fixed in time. And now plywood's $120 a sheet. And so the cost, there isn't any time adjusting for the relative cost of materials. And that's how,
It's huge.
that's how you figure out the 50% calculation is, what is the cost of this improvement today? And 10 sheets at $120 is a lot more than 10 sheets at
Eats up that
$15.
50% pretty quick.
And so maybe this is a unique moment in time where we've had this skew, but do we need to correct the cost estimate?
Well,
Or-
materials have come down considerably. I mean, they're probably within 10 to 15% of what they were
Okay.
in 2018. So it's not overly out of control.
Okay.
Labor.
Last year would have been a different conversation, but
Oh, no, I agree. But, I mean, labor's
Yeah.
labor. I mean, well, I got the stuff for free. I understand that part, but it's still calculated in the cost of actually doing the improvement.
And that's something that you don't have deviation from, that's required by the state. And the other thing was that cost calculation, having the independent cost estimate happen. Do you allow for that independent cost estimate? Because there's been, Vinny, in his expertise, comes up with a number, and then some people say, no, I disagree with that. And there's no like mechanism to
Can I just get a little bit of background on how the cost estimate comes about? So it's not just a, these are the tickets from the project kind of deal?
No, you apply for a building permit,
Mhm.
you give me your entire scope of work or what you're looking for. We have RS Means books, we have RS Means online, and it tells you, they're really, really close, right? Right, you put in your zip code, right to the cost of what it costs to do business, I mean, they're, sometimes they're scarily close,
So if you have a licensed contractor doing a bid for a homeowner and it's substantially lower than what your books say it is, do you say, I gotta use what's in the book, or if it's a licensed contractor and they've given a written bid, that's,
Well, I mean, we use it consistently, but we see that all the time where somebody wants to put a 20-foot by 40-foot deck on the back of their house. Pressure treated lumber, E-pay, and they're gonna do it for 13 grand. You can't even buy the material for 13 grand.
okay, so I get that.
So, I see it daily, what the stuff costs and what people are charging, if you can do the deck that cheap, why don't you do the deck at my house first and then go to that?
So I think
But
the
it's-
materials, the materials are easy to calculate because, that's, the market
They are
is
what
the
they are,
market.
yeah.
But what a contractor is willing to charge or not for their time, their labor part,
That's the.
which you have to calculate somewhere,
Yeah.
that's up to them. If I wanna come in and.
But that's their profit.
I
Their
agree,
profit
but
margin.
the numbers game is more in the flood zone area than it is outside of the flood
So
zone.
that's likely also because of the size of the projects too, I would think.
It could be the size of the
Well, and
project
the
or
structure, the
they
50%
know what
threshold.
their 50% number is.
Yeah. and they'll
So
look
they
at it.
need to stay under the 50% number. And by all means, if you can do it, perfectly fine, but you can't put on a gigantic addition and say it's 150,000. It's got 130,000 of materials. Who's building this thing for you,
At cost.
No, it's fair, everything's free. Unfortunately, and the guidelines for FEMA show that you can't do that. I mean, they're down to the point where it's their sales tax. I mean, everything's included. So their guideline is, and they're lenient on some stuff, but overall numbers, they're parallel and straight all the time. So doesn't really vary.
Don't forget, FEMA's looking for compliance. So they're not gonna let stuff go. They want to, if you're really gonna do that much renovation to it, then jack
Jack
the house.
right.
It's good to be the government. So I think
So you're closing it up, new
for me, it
construction.
all circles back to the look
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
I think we really don't have a lot of leeway
I don't
in
think so either.
decision making.
Yeah,
And at least right now, until somebody talks me out of it, I'm really enamored with separating out. And
New-
maybe
new
even
versus
having a
existing.
longer look back on flood-related damage. The house that is repeatedly damaged by that kind of weather event, I think,
You give a break.
clearly needs
Yeah.
to come up, and the homeowner shouldn't be, shouldn't be ignoring that.
Well, we've been very fortunate with that, where repetitive damage where it's so far apart for damage. It's, if it happens within 5 years, it's not 50%, it's 25%. We haven't run into that.
And then,
Sandy took care of a lot. There's a lot of houses damaged during Sandy.
Well, actually, I raised,
Between Irene and Sandy, they kind of took care of a lot of the houses that were prone to flooding.
so what does it look like language-wise? The FEMA doesn't require a look back. So if we say we're only talking about the bathroom renovation, the repairing the old roof, sort of the normal homeowner experience type of expenses. Is that expressed with a zero look back language, or is it just a 30-day look back?
It's an improvement to the house.
So it just doesn't count.
How it counts.
Well, it counts towards the 50%, but there's no cumulative nature to it.
No, I mean,
There's no-
so
there's no
where
look
we
back.
have the 1-year look back period.
In our current regs.
And people plan around that 1-year look back period,
course
by
they
all
do.
means, you know.
So, and
They
that's
know
what I'm
how,
trying
they
to.
know how to play the game.
We're gonna
And
break
which is-
ground.
You know what, that's our look back period, that's perfectly fine. If you change the look back period, then it will be a different ballgame, but.
I think Bruce was talking about not having. it.
And I'm trying to
Oh,
understand.
then you're talking free for all that.
We have a 1-year
I
look
don't know how
back.
that would work.
So the previous building permit would have to be closed out first before they could do any other construction.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, you have our present ordinance and with the 1-year look back period would actually be on the last inspection and the final inspection of the project. It's 1 year from that date. And then the money comes off and you can start all.
Then it's a rolling 1 year. So it's on the 1-year anniversary of that inspection that
Yes, once
expense
the
falls
permit's
off.
closed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
But if that permit wasn't closed out, you want to start another project, now those two permits come together. The cost,
And from your perspective, why is a no look back or very short look back a bad thing?
If you had no look back period, you wouldn't have any improvement for compliance with the flood zone. It's that simple.
So it's set.
So basically, somebody could do anything, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to.
Yeah, you can finish one project and move on to the next, no look back period. So we just be repetitive, never ever coming into compliance with FEMA, which I don't know.
So the 50% would never comply, you'd never have an issue with that.
Right,
as long as you close out your permits
As
before
long
you
as you close
go
them
on
out.
to the next one.
Correct.
I mean, if you tore it down.
If you tore it down, then
That's
that's,
new,
Now
that's new
it's-
construction.
Now it's
now it's
building
building
code.
code.
now the project is,
Yeah.
A tear down is considered new construction.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's what, so it's more, but I think, I mean, what's been happening now is I think there's been an encouragement, right? People are encouraged to be compliant. I don't know.
I like the words Al used though, I like the encourage versus.
Well, yeah, but I,
Peggy, it was up there.
Yeah.
no, but I look
Yeah,
at
it's great.
it, I'm just saying, you look at that list.
Gave you credit.
There's a reason that every coastal community has some sort of look back period. There's not one coastal community in Connecticut that does not have, and the state is recommending 5 years. So,
We have one.
well, no, but if you're going to none, I'm saying that's
Oh, no,
where,
think-
I think that would be really problematic.
And I'm,
And that-
in my example, I'm saying there's a storm-related path, and then there's a normal maintenance path. So I don't think maintaining your house so that it's livable, right? The roof doesn't leak, the windows don't leak, the furnace works, right? Because the furnace counts. I don't see those in themselves in a home on Corinth Drive triggers an elevation change in the house. I think, and again, it's easy to think about the oceanfront property. It's any floodplain in the town of Madison. That, and I don't know that we have the ability to, beyond the velocity areas, which are specifically called out, if we can then further resolve the ordinance between the different ones. So can we, the house that's on the Hammonasset River, can that have a different floodplain ordinance clause in it than?
I think you could have different requires depending on, I don't know all the different
these are
delineations
different
between
flood zones, I
zones.
think.
I don't know.
You wanna have a
if
different
Bill's
elevation
Karen
in
would
V zone?
know better, or do you
FEMA-
know, John?
FEMA's
I mean, an AE zone on Linden Lane, for example, it's very similar to an AE zone on the Hammonasset River. It's both the same zone, the regulations are the same. Except there's a few minor differences if it's riverine flooding, so Linden Lane flooding is due to the Atlantic Ocean coming up. An AE zone on the Ammonasset River it's riverine flooding. There's some different regulations that apply there as far as, for example, if you fill in the flood zone, you actually can restrict the conveyance of the river. And you can't just fill in the flood zone without compensating for that somewhere else. So there are some differences like that. So in other words, you fill in a flood zone in a riverine setting, you need to provide compensatory storage. So you're not raising the elevation as a result of filling. So there are some minor differences, but basically A zones are A zones and V zones are V zones, and coastal A zones are kind of in between. They're along the shoreline and they require V zone construction if you're in a coastal A zone. So that's that fringe area, like say on the north side of Middle Beach Road as opposed to on the south side.
Right.
Could you estimate what percentage of homes in town are in a flood zone? Is it 2%? Is it 30%?
I don't know, Al, but that data it's
We
available.
looked at that, yeah, I think we did look at it, I just don't remember off the
Yeah,
top.
percentage wise, you shouldn't want to
Yeah.
venture a guess, but
I
we,
know.
we definitely can get at that
Yeah.
data. It's there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was trying to get to where Bruce is trying to head here and see what the magnitude is.
Well, and I think it also dovetails into the ongoing conversations we have about keeping Madison affordable for people that are aging. Again, the flood zones that you don't normally think about, and that older home, maybe with an older resident, back to Jennifer's point, are we putting them in a position where they do work on their house that they can't afford because they have to raise it, or they have to sell the house and move out? And is it consistent with our bigger goal of keeping Madison affordable for seniors as they age? Or people of modest incomes, people that are in their starter homes in Madison?
What they call it.
So that's, it's back to the, do as little harm as possible.
And then the question is, too, if we are meeting certain state guidelines, what is there harm that we're doing to the town as a whole if people don't raise to +2, or is that just a
well,
liability there
What's
is?
the legal harm?
well, I think I think that the discussion, if you've gone to those presentations like 2 years ago, is there is an impact on the community, because when you have massive flooding and homes that aren't compliant, they collapse, they cause damage to the neighborhood, they can impact homes that are compliant, right? So you can have a home that's not compliant and it gets blown apart in a storm and it affects the neighborhood, right? So there's that. There's also just protecting what is a valuable part of Madison. One of our crown jewels is our beaches, and so making it more resilient, being able to endure those storms where water can flow in and out without having to take down and destroy, right? So the more resilient properties are, that's good for the taxpayers, it's good for the town. And that's why I think the state has, pushed in this direction. And a lot of towns have chosen to go in this direction, to have, some push towards compliance and raising elevation. But I think, the discussion here is there's pros and cons. It's hard because it's a carrot and stick, right? And, I think the community benefits when people do make their houses more resilient and survive storms, and it saves more rescue efforts, destruction, to neighborhoods.
But again, Peggy, we spend more of our energy and efforts on encouraging people,
Right.
right? Versus requiring.
Yeah.
I think when we get down into requiring, there's costs in terms of our
Yeah.
staff having to
Yeah.
go out and, check homes and scrutinize and regulate. And I'm not sure we necessarily are ready to go do that.
Well,
At least I'm not hearing that.
I mean, I think that, you know, it's just, I think we recognize we have to update the ordinance. I think we need to make changes that are forward thinking. The question is like how, you know, how much is there gonna be in terms of, you know, requiring versus regulating?
But is there a phased approach such that the first phase, we align the, you know, to the state guidelines? We just do that, just so that things are consistent. Would that help or hurt you?
Well, it doesn't hurt me. We're required to go to +1 anyhow. So I mean, that's just flat line right there. The +2 would be adding an additional foot of freeboard. And that would be a decision by you guys. I mean, personally, no. But secondly, you know, with this extensive rise of seawater, I would probably wait before adding additional foot. This is my own personal opinion. Reviewing this in 2030 when the new maps come out.
The other thing to keep in mind is to be in compliance with the insurance. So if we don't do the minimums, we have a chance that you know, the people on the shoreline, their rates are gonna go up for the flood insurance.
Was there an incentive to do, like you're saying, they're getting an incentive anyways with the insurance, right?
Yes,
To go to the two.
yes, so some of them are picking to go up that higher level, so they get,
Right.
right. But you're talking about the other
That's the
homeowner.
insurance companies encouraging versus us encouraging.
Right. And if you do away with the look back period, I don't know how that would affect, because if we go down below the minimum, I don't know how that's gonna affect the overall town for flood insurance. We'd have to look into that.
I mean, I can't imagine getting less restrictive. I think the discussion is, we are where we are, and then do we want to be more restrictive in certain areas, right? Because I think to go back the other way would not be, you know, it's just not where we are with where the state is going and also with the realities of the flooding. These events are happening more and more. So, I mean, eventually the homeowners are gonna have to make some really hard choices, because it's just gonna get worse.
But the question is that a homeowner's decision as opposed to us regulating it?
Right.
I'm sensing, at least from this board, that
Yeah.
I don't think collectively we're interested in regulating it. That's a fair
Regulating it
statement?
further than where we are
Yeah,
now, because we
right,
already
right,
regulate.
Right, yeah.
Well, and the private market, the insurance market is nudging homeowners in a certain direction. Anybody buying a home, certainly on the coast, has to be buying it with their eyes wide open.
I would think, yeah.
And, you know, looking at the pictures, I'd be curious to know how much of that is water retained because our sewer infrastructure isn't capable of draining. You know, is that overwash from a wave that then gets trapped on the road
You know,
and
the
floods?
water level is that high.
Or is that the rain?
No, it was
Some
the
of
water
it's-
level.
It's not the drain, it's not the
It's not the
drainage,
drainage.
I don't think. I think it's actually the water, we've seen the water come back
The
up
ocean-
through the
ocean
outlet,
level.
pipe outlets.
The
And
water
up
level
through
of
the
the
grades.
sound was up that high where it just wasn't
And
received.
as soon as the tide recedes, the road drains.
That water.
And
Yeah.
we obviously do have drainage improvement projects where they need to be improved, but that's not gonna solve it.
And some of those previous pictures, like on Middle Beach West, I mean, there's a lull where that garage is versus regular plain, so yeah, it's gonna sit there for a while.
And it all recedes, you know, it's tidal and that's it's like, it's a, you know, crapshoot, like, same storm, it's a low tide, totally different results than the timing of that and where the moon is. I mean, it's funny, like we now start looking at all that because we know this is gonna be bad. Even though you're watching the news and thinking it's not gonna be that big of a deal, you know, in terms of the storm, overall, the rainfall, so.
Well, I
Wind and, you know.
Admittedly, I'm hung up on the splitting the two things apart and treating them as separate conversations. The FEMA document seems to allow us to do that. And we are
You're saying flood improvements versus other improvements?
So repairs due to flood damage.
Storm damage or flooding?
Well, I mean, this is a flood.
Allowing that or not allowing that?
Having a longer look back period for flood damage
Flood damage.
repairs
Right.
versus just your normal regular.
See, it's funny, I guess I was looking at just the opposite more, that you want to encourage people to make their houses resilient. So if they're doing improvements after a storm,
Right.
not capturing that, and then capturing all the just like, I want a nicer kitchen, or I want a, so you're looking at just the opposite. You're saying having a longer look back because they're impacted by the storm, and therefore they should be encouraged to.
And so said the other
Just trying
way.
to, yeah, I know.
A house that has never had flood damage in the
Yeah.
last 70 years,
Right.
but is in a floodplain.
Yeah.
I think a homeowner would be very likely to say, I'm gonna improve my house and I'm gonna worry less about the flooding. I mean, just historically.
Right.
I don't have it. But our ordinance would say, even though you're in that floodplain and the life of the house has never been impacted by a flood event, you still have to raise it up.
Yeah.
And I don't see the sense in that. And that's the eventuality I'm trying to make sure we don't unintentionally catch up in this.
Well, and as the flood maps are just gonna get more extensive and cover more area.
And I think that's a great point, because they are gonna get more
Yeah.
extensive. And we are going to catch up more and more homes
Yeah.
that
Are required?
and maybe aren't able, or are less able, and also probably going to sustain
Yeah.
more infrequently any kind of damage. I mean, I think about, we've got the development going on over the low-income housing, or the workforce housing.
Wellington.
Oh, yeah,
Or cottage.
Not cottage, but the
Behind Lenny and Joe's?
Hope Partners one.
Yeah, Wellington,
Behind Lenny and Joe's.
near,
Cottage Road,
near,
And of course, it's new construction, so they're gonna have to comply with everything. What about Kensington behind them? Is that Kensington back there?
No, it's
Windermere.
it's Windermere.
Windermere. How are they situated?
I don't know what they're,
Just about every one of those units are outside of the flood zone.
Yeah.
Today, how long before?
Well,
that?
yeah, it's close. I mean, in terms of.
Even the ones on the river.
Oh, they're high up for that.
They're setbacks,
Yeah.
they're setback.
Yeah.
They're high enough.
Yeah,
But to
they're
Maggie's point, the floodplain is gonna change, and
yeah,
I
Those
have
all
to
be in
believe
it.
at some point they're in it.
right.
Which also is a complicated situation because they're like a carriage home, right? Where it's two units side by side, so two different
Some are
owners.
standalone.
Yeah, so what if one
unit
side
A
wants
is
to make
damaged and unit B
improvements and
isn't.
the other
Yeah, talk
side?
about complications. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think,
but that's another.
So it sounds like, I'm just kind of to wrap it up, I mean, I think we have enough to come back with a draft that pretty is like not making any major policy changes, and then come back with some additional thoughts and exploring breaking apart the look back period, right? Exploring two different look back periods, because I don't know enough about that. I know there is a way that it's allowable.
Let's at least
I
get
mean-
the draft cleaned up.
Yeah, and we
aligned
have
and all
that,
That's-
and I
we've
think
been
we can
waiting
put
to do that
in
for-
some things and then bracket a few things and come back with a draft. Last time we had this discussion, I had recused myself. We had, my husband owned a property in the floodplain on East Fork Road. We actually had an active application because we're doing some improvements, and so I felt I had to kind of withdraw from the discussion. I thought it was just out of the abundance of caution. I don't know where I stand now because we sold the property, but our projects are done. So, that would have had a direct impact, obviously changes. That's why I
We'll submit you to
told
the
myself.
ethics commission.
Yeah, well, no, I
So-
don't want to be seen as, but I think it's important to get this draft and maybe I just step back when we start voting on specific provisions.
so from my part, I think you've moved this conversation forward in a fair and impartial way. I'm very comfortable with not only the tone of the conversation, but the content of what we've had. So I think I've said this already, I have every faith that you will, remain impartial. I'm don't see an ethical conundrum here for you, and would support your continued participation in the conversation. So just, you know.
Yeah,
that's
no, I
what
appreciate that. I just gotta think about, I mean, before I think it was very quick cut because we had an active application. And you're starting to go, wait, this could actually affect our project. So that's why I was like, I have to recuse myself. But note
One-
taken. Well,
One more thing, to Bruce's point. I would guess to say, pretty good that 90+% of the damages from both of the major storms, Irene and Sandy, were wind damage, not flood damage. And that is one major
But this is
homeowner
not
back
wind
and forth
insurance.
fight.
This is not a wind insurance program. This is a flood insurance
But
program.
it doesn't make a difference. It's damage to the structure because of wind.
And they can still claim it as.
that was what the
That's
point I was
part of it.
saying,
That's
like you
the
have
way
to
that it
say this
works.
is a storm event. It can't be just be a flood event because it is.
Well, this is,
No,
I mean,
well, the
this,
insurance
And then you
companies
get
did that as soon as
it's
they.
subjective.
so this
Like
is,
names.
yeah, and this is completely editorial.
Yeah.
This is a law that was written around the Mississippi River, in the floodplains of the Mississippi River. And the government said, let's just apply it everywhere, where there might be any kind of flooding. And they put no nuance
I
on
didn't think of the east and the west.
on sort of the coastal communities at all on this. And you're right, the mode of damage in Madison is wind and maybe wave action, right? But that is not the floodplain flooding that happens on the large rivers. So this is a bit of an oval peg being pounded into a round hole here.
I mean, I'll be more than happy to get in touch with Diane and bring up the scenarios that you're talking about, whether it's restricted maintenance versus what counts, but I already know the answer.
Well, the document clearly says you can't distinguish between them. So the only thing we can really exercise judgment on is the look back, I think.
1 year.
But then you still have to look back based on some level of criteria.
Well, and then
Right.
we can look
What-
back,
what
we
is
can
that
look back
criteria?
based on damage, we can look back based on renovation,
So-
improvement.
I'm just looking, we're bumping up to an hour, and I know we have a few members of the public on. One actually has a hand raised, so I'm thinking, are we good to come?
Yeah,
We'll have
absolutely.
further discussion, have a draft to work
Yep,
through,
Yeah.
and, get some questions answered. So, with that, I guess I will, open it up to citizens' comments. Jean, are you still available? I see we have a hand raised.
Yes, I will allow them to speak.
Tony,
It's like Alex.
yep. Okay, Alex, you can just unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, guys. Thanks for a great meeting tonight. Hopefully you guys can hear me clearly.
Yeah.
All right. Just a dovetail, I hope, to some of the topics that were raised tonight. Particularly the photos that you posted, select person Lyons on Middle Beach Road. I'm on Fence Creek, and the state has a culvert that is probably inadequate and likely blocked, that I suspect prevents ocean water from going from south of the post road to north of the post road. So my ask would be, are we pushing the state to do what they're supposed to be doing while they push us to do what they think we should be doing? And that, I think, ties into what Select Person Wilson brought up as well. This isn't just sea rise, this is block culverts that really should be updated. And to tie, this is why we're on the Boston Post Road. While I acknowledge it's a state road and speed limits don't have much to do with us, and just to lay a marker down, and we're working through the LTO Chief Drum on this. With all the new construction, General's residence, new people moving in, Cottage Road, dog park, that 45-mile-an-hour speed limit is just ridiculous. and we don't have crosswalks, we don't have sidewalks. You know, it's shared by bicyclists and people walking and families and now a dog park. We really need to get on that as far as reducing the speed limit from 45 to probably what should be 35. You know, to give someone a ticket doing 50 and a 45 is laughable. No one's going to get stopped for that, and a ticket will be thrown out in court. So you can easily have cars racing 50 miles an hour, you know, and with speedy cars, electric cars, you can, you know, get up to 60 miles an hour in 4 or 5 seconds. So I ask for your help as well, and sort of bring some attention to that. And my last point, and I'll shut up. Looks like Eversource again is working on trees today on Scotland Road, and you have a lot of people that are upset about it. And I know you guys have discussed this, but I had raised this with some friends in West Hartford, and it seems like some other towns have no problem getting transmission wires buried. And yet we're having, you know, what amounts to our beautiful trees, which is part of Madison's charm, removed pretty severely and heavily, as you guys well know, into the fall zone. And it's occurring today, and people are still upset. I would also ask that you push back on Pura and try to get us some of the buried lines that other towns across Connecticut are getting. Those are my 3 comments. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Okay, thank you very much. And certainly just a real quick comment, the Coastal Resiliency Commission is actually doing, like, identifying those types of improvement projects and infrastructure projects that we need to do to deal with some of the flooding and the blockages, the drainage and all that stuff.
I haven't heard that particular culvert come up, but I certainly can
Yeah,
raise
I
it.
know, and you're with that commission, so I know they're looking at us, so you can flag that.
Yep.
And then certainly we have we're going through a whole townwide complete streets, bicycle pedestrian plan that will make recommendations, and some of that will involve state roads, but also you speaking to the chief and know that it's a struggle with the state sometimes on state property, so. And then trees, you know, I will certainly continue to, you know, beat that drum about burying power lines, certainly. That's going to be a challenge for the entire state. Some communities have been better and more effective at getting them buried. A lot of it is density driven. So, but any other hands raised? I don't see any hands raised. So I think we are good with that. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. And with that, can I get a motion to adjourn? All right, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, gang, for showing up.
Oh, yeah.